A lot of reason why we feel like we don't have a voice is because we don't use ours. Like, I bet you if you ask anybody here, they don't vote.
Do you plan on voting in the upcoming presidential election?
No. Do I really want to go and like fill out papers and really vote?
It's not much of an interest, but I do have it in mind.
I'm not too sure.
I'm not sure, but I do feel like that's an important thing to talk about. Like, we're going to be the new leaders of this generation.
I actually want to vote. As a citizen of this country, I feel like voting actually matters.
Yeah, I am planning on voting. Everybody should have the opportunity to, and like, votes matter.
Voting is our main way of getting represented, be the changes we want to see, especially this upcoming election.
I feel like my voice would make a difference, even though it's just one vote.
What do you look for in a candidate? What matters to you?
Actually making changes and don't say I'll do this and don't do anything and just sit in the office and do nothing.
I look for a person that can represent me. I look for a person that I can see myself in.
Abortion really matters to me.
The violence, the trash problem in New York, and taxes.
Racism, police brutality.
Overcrowded all of the places and the shelters.
Homelessness, drug addiction both lead to like a downward spiral of never being able to get out or having a hard time getting out.
The healthcare system and the justice system, which both need to be reformed in a big way.
Gentrification with the rent increase. I don't want that to be a future problem for me or my children.
What would you say to someone who doesn't think that their voice matters or that they're not planning on voting?
Knowing the history of our country is really important because we know that the people have power no matter where they are, no matter who they are.
Go and vote.
Eligible to vote for the first time to vote in the presidential in 2024. By 2028, Gen Z and millennials combined will represent the largest voting bloc in America. This generation is fundamentally different in how they want to do something. They've lived through a global pandemic, an intersectional reckoning for equity and justice, and rising economic uncertainty. Being the most diverse generation in history, they see social issues through the prism of intersectionality and understanding that they have to champion gender equity alongside issues of race and sexual orientation. With many already experiencing the impact of climate injustice firsthand, this is not just an environmental crisis, it's contributing to a mental health crisis that has become an epidemic, according to the US Surgeon General. Amidst global unrest, young people are leading the way. They're calling for more responsible and accurate technology movement. Despite their lasting push for change and for it to be systemic, their inherent digital savvy means that they will make sure that they both understand how to use their civic journey to accomplish good. Our research shows that 76% of Do Something young people want to do something. But the reality is that only 32% of young people actually know where to start. So here's the future, and this is why you all are here tonight. We are celebrating both 30 years of youth-led impact, but we're also looking ahead to see how we're going to fuel these next generations of young people. To do this, we're rebuilding and reimagining Do Something from the ground up. We're here to meet the needs of Gen Z and Gen Alpha and the generations to come. I joined Do Something almost 3 years ago with a clear call to action. Do Something was ready to meet the moment and evolve to meet the needs of those young people. We had to test that hypothesis first and foremost with young people, our chief stakeholders. So to usher in a new generation of change makers, we're embedding civic engagement and the importance of young people claiming our democracy into everything we do. This moment calls for us to do our part to help them understand their civic identity, and then how do we help them move from being civically curious to civically committed so that they can take action on the issues that they care about most.
Welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Today, we tackle a pressing issue affecting millions of young Americans. President Biden's student loan forgiveness plans. A recent survey reveals that 43% of Gen Z voters in critical swing states feel he needs to do more. That's a really big number. And joining us to talk about this is DeNora Getachew, the CEO of DoSomething.org. And DeNora is going to provide insight into the concerns of millennials and Gen Zers, especially as they face the restart of student loan payments after a 3-year break. This issue not only impacts economic security, but also has the potential to shape the political landscape with 7 million new voters in 2024. Hi, DeNora. Thanks for joining the Black Press.
Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited to be with you and to engage in an important conversation as we look to what is Gen Z feeling as they think about their own economic security or lack thereof heading into the 2024 election cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to get started, can you just share some key insights, Denora, from Do Something's data on how student loans influence economic sentiments and feelings of vulnerability among Gen Zers?
So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be here. I'm the CEO of DoSomething.org. We are the largest nonprofit focused on young people and social change. We like to say that we're the hub for youth-centered activism and that we fuel young people to change the world. As we talk to Gen Zers, what we hear them say time and again is that student loans are a chief driver of their feelings around economic vulnerability or insecurity. Actually, in a recent SNAP poll, 68% of the young people who we engage with felt uncertain about their future economic opportunities after the student loan relief program had expired. And what we hear young people say is in this economy, right, the economic uncertainty has been a looming challenge for them in 2023. And an overwhelming majority of them, 86% of them, in fact, say that finding quality work, which they'd characterize as livable wages, benefits, job satisfactions, in a place they can afford to live, was the most important factors when they think about their own economic security. And so we have young people really sitting at the precipice here of I would say, a cliff, right? They're really concerned that they may not be able to attain what we might put in quotation marks and call the American dream, right? Like young people are coming of age in a very different economy. It has provided more flexibility and freedom for them, right, as they think about their own jobs and what they would like to, what jobs they would like to work in and how they see themselves as successful. The flip side is they haven't had the same level of certainty that previous generations have benefited from. And so I think we feel that especially pressing in this moment, one, as we lead into the holidays, or not lead into, we're a week out from the holiday season, but two, as we think about the return of student loan payments. And for so many young people, that is a pressing weight on their shoulders.
Yeah. So, how have you observed uh, young people channeling their concerns about student loans into meaningful action or advocacy?
What's great about Gen Z and even, coming up of age behind them, Gen Alpha, is that they're very clear about what motivates them to get engaged. And so much of that is personal. And so we've seen with, as you noted, 7 million or soon to be eligible voters coming of age in this time in advance of the 2024 election cycle, they're going to make this a voting issue, right? It's going to be one that's going to be pressing and top of mind for them in the poll booths when they think about voting up and down the ballot in 2024. And so, what we've seen in past election cycles is that young people, especially first time voters, are bringing with them the issues that matter most to them. And we have no doubt that economic security, which has consistently ranked as a top issue for Do Something members, will continue to be one in the 2024 election cycle. And they're going to make their voices heard as they think about the elected officials who have, been a blocker to progress in Congress and, the president himself and what he's done and what his record shows in this regard.
Yeah, and just staying with that for 1 second, do you get a sense on who they are holding accountable for this situation?
I think it's both, right? I think they're holding both the Congress for not actually taking meaningful action to be able to address this cliff that they, are facing, and they're asking the White House what more can they do, right? I think there is some recognition in our 24-hour news cycle that the president has done something, right, and has tried to take step forwards to protect Americans from this pressing weight of student loan debt. But there's more that can be done, and as someone who understands the importance of civics education, what we remind young people of is that there is legislative action that can be taken and there is executive action that can be taken. And so young people are really looking at both Congress and at the presidency as the vehicles for pushing forward real change in this regard. The president did take a step forward, right? And we saw that was challenged in the courts. And so the question is, what more can be done leading into 2024 to really ensure that there is weight and meat behind the notion of college affordability and access, right? As young people really begin to question how this relates to their real lives and whether college access is an important issue, this is going to be a big factor in that regard.
Do you get the sense that the young ones feel heard, or do they feel overlooked? What is the feeling when it comes to that?
I think it's actually feeling overlooked, right? What we see when we've talked to Do Something members and they range in age from 13 to 25, we hear a majority of young people say that they don't believe that lawmakers consider their voices. So, in fact, 83% of young people who took our SNAP poll say they don't believe that lawmakers consider their voices when they're enacting policy. That's a big distrust, right? And we're seeing that matches the national standards where a lot of mistrust in government has been rising over the last several years, and including especially this year. We're at a record level of distrust in government. While individuals maybe trust their own elected official, they don't trust government by and large to be responsive to the needs of society. And if that is the case, I think there's going to be more that's going to have to be done for elected officials at every level of government to prove that they're taking into consideration the fastest growing demographic in our electorate's voice when they're making decisions.
Yeah, and can you elaborate, DeNora, a little bit more on how young people perceive the link between addressing student loans and enhancing their prospects for economic advancement?
So this is a good point that you're raising here. You know, as we think about, I'm a Gen Xer, right? So I came of age at a very different time when it was important to say, go to college, right? And your path to quote unquote the American dream was through college. What we're seeing young people come of age right now realize is that that's not necessarily the case, right? That there are careers that you can pursue via technical education, which obviously don't have the same level of debt associated or cost associated with them, or you can pursue a career without having gone down that path. And so for those young people who are still considering college as a vehicle for their own economic attainment, the proof has to be in the pudding, right? There has to be a return on investment. And what we're hearing people say is they're not seeing that return on investment. We're living in a society right now where we have record level inflation, but we're not actually changing the policy as much to ensure that all Americans can see some level of economic mobility. And so we hear young people pushing for more change and actually pushing for clarity about what is the message, right? So on the one hand, you see the Fed recently saying that inflation is cooling and that they may, in quotation marks, be done raising interest rates. But then on the other hand, we're seeing Americans spending less and they're feeling constrained about their economic prospects. And that's at all levels of the spectrum. You look at young people in particular who came of age during COVID, right? So many of them are first-time voters, came out of college during COVID, and are concerned about whether salaries have kept pace with inflation and whether they actually will have the ability to live a viable life, especially in some of our bigger cities where the cost of living is really high. And so that's having a big impact on young people who, like I said, already are losing faith, not only in government, but even I would say in our economic system, and are concerned about whether they will be able to save for retirement, even though that's, far down the road for them, whether they will be able to afford to rent, let alone to own a home, all the things that are kind of baked into our notions of affordability and upward mobility in our society.
Yeah, earlier you mentioned being overlooked. Are there perhaps Congress people, perhaps senators, perhaps the president or candidates? Are they being reached out to? Are they courting the young ones, or are they just simply that overlooked?
I think that's going to be the fundamental question, right? Leading into 2024 is young people, as I've said, feel overlooked. But they are the fastest growing demographic in our electorate, right? The fact that there are 7 million new young people who are going to come of age before 2020, during the 2024 election cycle, which adds to 14 million since the 2020 election. That's a big growth in our electorate, right? And so they're on pace, young people, to match the size of their grandparents or the boomers in our electorate. And that means that they're a force to be reckoned with. They're more diverse. They have more progressive views about our society. And they're living in a moment not only where there's economic uncertainty, but where fundamental rights are being stripped away from communities. And they're concerned about whether this democracy is truly equitable, let alone representative. So those are all motivating factors that I would say to any current elected official or anyone seeking to be an elected official, that you better make sure you knock on the door of the young person and make sure you take their vote into consideration and their policy concerns into consideration as you're doing your work. But I would also be honest in saying, and this is the work we do here at Do Something, young people have an obligation too, right? So voting in and of itself is not a one-stop action, right? You don't vote for an elected official and then wish them adieu. You've got to hold them accountable, right? So you got to show up and you got to make sure that the day after the election or the day after the swearing in, that you're still knocking on their door, making sure that they understood what policy priorities matter to you. So, right, it is that that two-way street of our democracy, if you will. We don't live in a system where we coronate leaders, and so we have to make sure we're doing our part to hold them accountable the same way that elected officials have to make sure they're listening to their voters.
And have you been able to observe, DeNora? We talk often about the political chaos that where we are now, right? There's this threat to American democracy, what's left of American democracy. Have you been able to gauge whether a lot of that we see today, whether that has turned off the younger ones or motivated them?
I would say it is both. Young people vote based on the issues that matter most to them. So maybe unlike previous generations, what we're seeing is that there's more of a focus on the policy issues that matter to young people. And while they distrust elected officials necessarily to get it done, they care passionately and deeply about change and systemic change on key issues like reproductive health, like climate injustice, like gun violence and mental health support. And so young people are going to the polls with those proposals in mind, which is why you see such a big disparity, if you will, between the number of young people or people writ large, but especially young people who vote based on ballot measures versus on candidates, right? Because they care more about how do we get the policy across the finish line, not necessarily about how do the elected officials get the policy across the finish line. And so we are encouraging young people through our work here to do something to understand the nuts and bolts of how democracy works so they understand those two actually go hand in hand, right? You can't have policy solutions without elected officials, but you also have to make sure you're pushing forward the systemic change on issues that really matter to young people. So we really hear young people talking a lot about access to reproductive health as a motivating factor for them voting. And we saw that happen in the 2023 election cycle, albeit an off-year election. There is no off-year election. So like everybody's got to turn out to vote every year. But we saw that as a driving force in Ohio and Virginia, in Kentucky, right? We're seeing, again, we talked a lot already about economic uncertainty and how that is a driving factor. We're really seeing polling from young people around the importance of climate change and how that's motivating young people to go out to vote and make sure that they're voting for elected officials who have concrete solutions to stem the climate crisis. And then we're seeing gun violence and really the intersection of gun violence and mental health. We say like the safety and well-being as a big motivating factor for Gen Z to go out and vote, right? Like it is not lost on us that young people feel unsafe in their homes, in their schools, and in their communities from the threat of gun violence, right? And a recent Do Something Snap poll found that only 46% of young people said they're comfortable talking to their friends about mental health. And so we need to be doing more to help young people navigate the weight of all of these issues and how that's impacting their mental health so that they feel equipped to be able to be a part of this democracy and help shape it, claim it, and make it their own, right? Because it's theirs to inherit and shepherd going forward.
Yeah, and so I know the research that you guys do at Do Something is extensive, and I know you have your fingers on the pulse, especially when it comes to the young ones, Generation Z, even millennials. But are there particular challenges or perspectives within Generation Z, such as racial or socioeconomic disparities intersecting with the student loan issue and contributed to varied viewpoints? I mean, in other words, you got maybe a African American student may not have the same challenges that a non-African American student has, or a Asian American student, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, what's powerful about this generation of young people, and I'll say that in respect to millennials and Gen Zers who are able to vote, but also Gen Alpha who's coming of age behind them, is that they are the most diverse generations coming of age, right? And so in ways that we may not have thought about the intersection of issues, young people see all of these issues as intersectional, right? So there is the threat of the looming climate crisis impacting young people's mental health. There is the pervasiveness of gun violence and how that impacts all communities, right? Not just historically marginalized communities, right? The fact that gun violence is so pervasive, that's affecting young people's mental health. We have literally the threat, as you mentioned at the top of the conversation, of a democracy that isn't necessarily working to serve us anymore, affecting people's mental health, right? So you have a former president desiring to be president again, but also talking about undoing democracy amidst, a record level of participation in our electorate. And so it's like how to reconcile all of those things after all the trauma that young people have gone through during the pandemic and since then is really weighing on young people. So they don't just see these issues in isolation. They don't just see that the Supreme Court has stripped the rights of young people taking them back to, as I like to say, their grandparents' generation, right? No one thought
Yes.
that there would be a world in which there was no longer reproductive choice for women or for people who needed access to that health support. But yet that's the world they live in. We see a world in which rights, even though we're more diverse, are being stripped away from LGBTQ plus individuals. And so young people are concerned about the intersection of all of those issues. And what we keep trying to do here at Do Something is make sure they have concrete solutions to be able to affect change on them, right? So it is one thing that we could all do to complain and point our finger and stand in the corner and complain. As the great Shirley Chisholm once said, you don't actually get progress by whimpering and complaining. You get progress by implementing good ideas, right? And so we really are pushing for young people to see how they can leverage democracy to push forward good ideas. And that's everything from working together to put together solutions to those pressing issues. That's running for office. That's registering to vote. That's registering your peers to vote. It's all of that work is what's necessary to ensure that they're going to inherit a democracy that is the one they want to live in and be a part of.
And DeNora, considering the economic concerns tied to student loans in particular, do you think that there's a need for improved financial education among young people to navigate the challenges better? And how might this impact their activism?
Such a great question. You know what's fascinating to me? I am a mother of 3 children, including 2 who are Gen Alpha children, right? So one is 13, one's 11. And my version of financial education and literacy is very different than theirs, right? I tell a story of once having taken out a checkbook. I wrote a check, and my children are like, well, what is that? What is this piece of paper going to do, right? And I explained to them that this is a check and it's a currency, and I'm going to mail this check to someone to pay for something, right? It was actually a ticket to an event I wanted to go to. Okay, fine. So there are lots of lessons learned here. I put the check in the mail, I put it in the envelope, I put the stamp on it, all of these things that your kids are like, why are you doing this? I mailed the check. Weeks later, the check comes back. The envelope comes back in the mail because the event was sold out, right? And so we have young people who are growing up in a digital age who we are still talking to about how to balance a checkbook. We need digital literacy, financial literacy for digital native young people. Young people are gaming. They're conducting most of their currency and their expenditures digitally. And so we have to teach them financial education that meets the moment that they're living in. And so there's a pressing need to be able to modernize how we're engaging with young people to ensure that then what they're learning is relevant, but also resonant and also can have transferable skills for them.
Yeah. Wow. That I like how you put that. It was a really good analogy with the checkbook.
They're like, what are you doing with this checkbook, Mom? What are you doing?
Yeah, yeah, because a lot of them. Yeah, that's the other thing too. The young ones, they don't write in cursive. You talk about checkbooks, they don't even write in cursive.
Right, exactly. They don't write in cursive at all.
But beyond relief, DeNora, are there innovative solutions or policy changes that young activists propose to address the student loan crisis and promote a more sustainable system for future generations?
I think that's what young people are grappling with now. It's like, what are the right solutions? And I think they're taking a hard look at everything from college, right? And it's the value proposition of college. I will just say unequivocally and affirmatively, I still believe in the value of a college education, because it isn't just about teaching young people transferable skills, right? It is about how to think and how to think critically, right? As we come of age in the age of AI, and I am not anti-technology, we still do need an education system that prepares people to live life. And so young people, though, are critically thinking at college and what that value proposition means, but they're also thinking about the affordability of it and whether or not, as the cost of college continues to rise, whether there's value in that. And they're pushing back, rightfully so, on academic institutions to be more responsible in how they are pricing out college and what that return on investment is for them. They're also pushing for change. Again, let's give credit to President Biden. He did take a meaningful step forward to try to reduce the burdens and pressures of a student loan debt and affordability on young people. That was struck down. And so there's work to be done in the halls of Congress to figure out those big solutions, among many big solutions that our Congress members need to be. I'm like, can we just get the list and check it twice? There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And young people are pushing their elected officials to really take a hard look at this and right set the policies they're enacting in light of the current fiscal realities.
Well, when you think about it, Well, let me ask it this way, DeNora. Are there international examples or models of student loan policies that young people in the U.S. look at or look to as a potential inspiration or alternatives? And how might these influence the discourse?
That's a great question. I'm not sure of how other, like if there's a standard model that folks are looking to around the world. I know it's done differently in many countries, and it's a part of, whether it's apprenticeship programs or other vehicles that reduce the burden of college access. But that's a good question. I need to look into more, and the next time you have me on the show, I'll be able to speak to in more detail because I don't want to speak out of turn, if you will, on that one.
Well, and given the digital age that we live in, we have the technology and online platforms. We know that they played a role in mobilizing a lot of things. Like we go back, maybe these younger ones forget Occupy Wall Street and things of that nature. But young people on this issue of student loan, how has technology mobilize them on this issue of student loan, and talk about, if you will, what trends do you see or foresee in digital activism in this context?
A great question. I smiled a little bit there when you mentioned Occupy Wall Street, right? Because I remember it vividly, but I was also like, how long ago was that, right?
Right.
We've advanced so far from then, and yet not enough is the honest answer, right? And what's powerful about technology is that it can mobilize people at scale. I think what is challenging, and I say this full-throatedly, is that I don't want to see young people, let alone the rest of us, become slacktivists. So there's this notion that, like, if I clicked the button, if I added my +1 or my heart or my like or whatever it was, that now I've done something. And while you have done something insofar as you join the chorus or collective of voices, that doesn't in and of itself lead to transformative change, right? And so there is still some level of civic knowledge that young people, and all of us for that matter, need to have about how transformative change happens. What is not happening consistently enough is marching and protesting in the halls of Congress to make the voices heard, or in the district offices when legislators are there to make the voices heard that this is a pressing issue that needs to be addressed, right? So it used to be the measure was, if you can remember those days, thousands of people signing the petition would move the needle, right? Tens of thousands. Right. Now it's millions, right? But then what? Where's the follow through? Because what ends up happening, and the reason I use the term slacktivism intentionally, is you can't go from one click to the next and like, oh, I really care about this, but I care about this too, and I care about this too. There does have to be some stick-to-itiveness of how do we actually get the policy passed, right? And so what I want to caution all of us against is not having technology be the solution in and of itself, as opposed to a tactic that can be used to push forward that change we're all seeking. And so, what we're seeing young people realize is that it is not just the campaign itself that's going to move the needle, right? And so the trends are in favor of having more celebrity and influencers attached to pushing for change, but that too can feel transactional, right? I do still think there's an important notion of grassroots activism, of how many people are going to go meet with the elected official and make their voices heard, who's going to put out the op-ed to push forward and rise above the noise of the 24-hour news cycle so that transformative change can happen. Because now we live in this day and age of, like, from here to there, that it all feels so fleeting and doesn't actually lead towards that transformative change that young people really are pressing for.
Yeah, and DeNora, we talked a bit about societal issues. These students and younger ones, how do they view it all together? The student loan debt and problems like climate change, racial justice, healthcare. How do they make that connection, if they do, and how might they leverage those intersections for change?
Great question. I think, again, it is so impressive that young people see these issues as so intersectional. And the pandemic, I think one of the positive results, if we can say there was any positive result, is this notion that all of these issues are interconnected. We had started getting to a place where that was more in the public dialogue and discourse, and the pandemic really accelerated that and made clear, and especially this is a positive of technology, because you could connect the dots more seamlessly between issues. So we're seeing young people really connect the dots. We're seeing them passionately care about the intersection of issues. Again, what I think the next growth opportunity is for all of us is then how do you leverage that passion, that excitement towards sustained change, right? So that it doesn't, What I'm not saying to your listeners or to young people in particular is that they have to, as I like to say, democracy is a full contact sport. They don't have to play in the sport every day, right? Good players of any sport often sit on the bench and take a time out for rest and recharge and self-care. But they do have to stay in it long enough to know that they're making an impact. So it can't just be, again, that I clicked here, I liked it, I added my name, but I didn't actually do something, right? And so the work we do here at Do Something is intended to make sure people understand what are the things that they can do, starting most basic, kind of at the grassroots level of volunteerism. Maybe it's the one-off action. And then how does that level up into that systemic change? And every person is not going to go on that journey. But what we need to understand is how do you build those coalitions or those collective of young people who see themselves as leading on that change together, and that they're going to stick to it, right? And stick at it until they get some systemic change across the finish line.
And finally, DeNora, tell us a little bit more about DoSomething.org and these surveys that you do. This particular survey we discussed, tell folks how they can find it, and just give us a little bit of a short roundup of it.
Such a perfect way to end. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. DoSomething.org, that's our website. We are the hub for youth-centered activism. We help young people ages 13 to 25 find that civic curiosity and take it into civic commitment. We really provide a platform and a vehicle for young people to engage on the issues they care about most, whether that's climate justice or mental health support or democracy and civic engagement and everything in between. It really is this hub for young people to find their own voice, find their civic identity, and take action alongside hundreds of thousands of other young people to do good and really improve the world in ways big and small. When you join Do Something, you are actually joining a hub of young people who are committed to leading change. It's diverse, it's intersectional, and it's inclusive. And we hope that more young people will join us here in this community where they belong, where they can take action to register their peers to vote in the lead up to 2024 election cycle, make a plan to vote, and make sure that they get engaged.
Well, there you have it. DeNora Getachew, the CEO of DoSomething.org. Thank you so much for joining the Black Presses. Let it be known. We appreciate you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope to be back again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all for watching.